I can't fault myself for that because you're not
It's
born
not
with
your
this.
fault.
You're right. A kid, when your kid is born, they don't go, here's the handbook. I mean, ideally, that would be amazing.
Yeah.
But, as a mom that's raising four kids, every single one of them is so vastly different from the other. You have to set the expectation, but there's a level of understanding that you need to have that they will set their own path.
Hello and welcome. This is the Power to the Parents podcast. I'm Eileen Ariaza, the Executive Director at Parents Together and your host. And I am so excited to have Naomi Pena with us today. Naomi is an amazing mom who has been advocating for her kids in New York, specifically around helping them to read proficiently. So, um, reading is something that is so essential for learning, for moving ahead in school. And we have a reading crisis in our country. And so, Naomi, I'm thrilled to talk to you today. Tell me a little bit about yourself, your family, how many kids you have. What's going on with you?
Thank you for having me, Eileen. I'm so excited to be here. I am a born and raised New Yorker, particularly from the Lower East Side, and I have four kids. But they're all at this point young adults and teens. My oldest is 23, and my youngest are 14-year-old twins. So I've been in this parenting space for 2 decades, over 2 decades, and I've learned a lot.
Yeah. Um, yes. And you specifically around reading and supporting your kids with reading. But I want to get into all of that. But first, I just want to ask you just about your general approach to reading with your kids when you first brought your firstborn from home from the hospital and sort of like when he was little. How did you approach reading with him?
Well, I did everything that I was told that I should do. I should, get as many children's books as possible. I should read to him. Um, and that was fine with me. I like to read. So I got into these at the time. There was like these book clubs that you can subscribe to, and they would send you like a monthly set. And we had like Dr. Seuss Through the Nose. I think I had the whole series. So I did that stuff because I was like, that's what's expected, and I will do that.
Yeah. And did your kid like being read to? What were some of his favorite
Yeah,
books?
yeah, he totally did. I mean, Dr. Seuss definitely was fun for him because it rhymed and the stories were, was interesting and the illustrations were cool. Um, but he definitely liked books that had a good story to it for sure.
Yeah. Okay, so as your child started getting older and started school, tell me a little bit about what happened with his reading.
Um, it started in first grade, and I started getting complaints from the teachers, how he was struggling, basically not being able to pay attention, really kind of when it came to the reading, he was doing something else. So it's like
Mm.
being distracted, playing around, like always something else. And as a result, um, there were consequences when it came to that at home because if you're misbehaving in school, then I have to address it at home. Um, and so it's kind of the it's spilled over into our home life. And then after, and it was really contentious. I mean, it was hard, and I there was a moment that is forever burned in my memory bank with him that I remember like sitting at the dinner table with him and just saying, like, I know you don't like getting in trouble. No kid does. And I know you don't like getting me upset. And I know you don't like being punished. And I know you don't like getting in trouble at school. Like, what is the deal? What is going on? And that's when he told me, he's like, Mom, I don't know what it is. It's like my brain won't let me. And that was like a major punch in the gut to me because I realized this is not a kid who's quote unquote trying to be bad. This is a kid
Right.
who is really trying and it's not working. By then, there was also conversations I needed to evaluate him. So I went ahead
Yeah.
and started that.
Right. Well, can I just say, like, kudos to you for asking him and just like acknowledging, like, you don't, because you're right. No kid wants to get in trouble. No kid is trying to be bad on purpose. And even though we're frustrated and it feels that way, it's like it takes a lot of self control from as a parent and self awareness to just like realize something else is going on here. Um, how did you? So you said it was like a punch in the gut when he said that to you. Um, what else did you feel hearing that? Like, did you have any other internal, like, were you questioning things about your own parenting?
Oh, absolutely. Like that, I immediately felt horrible. I immediately felt bad because I was being hard on him. You know, I
Yeah,
had expectations of him. I like you are expected to go to school. You are expected to do well.
yeah,
Um, and that is where I started really taking inventory of like what my expectations are and what the school's expectations are, but really looking at how it's actually being translated in my child. Um, and that's where I started to realize that there has to be something more here. As you said, no, like I said, no child wants to be in trouble. And honestly, like hindsight, right? 2020, when a child is expressing behaviors, they're signaling to the adults in their life that there's something wrong. They don't have
right,
the vocabulary to tell you, actually, I'm having a hard time with reading, so can we triage this? Like they don't have
right.
that insight. It's on us to kind of, dissect things out.
Yeah. Yeah, it's on us and it's also on their teachers, their school.
Mm-hmm.
And they were flagging it for you. So you said that they suggested that he be evaluated. And so what did you learn from that evaluation?
It discovered that he does struggle to read. And at the time, I kind of got lucky. They didn't put it down on paper, but when we were reviewing kind of the results at his IEP meeting, the staff said, "Well, these are markers of someone who's dyslexic." And at the time, had no idea what that meant. I was,
Yeah.
I think kind of the overarching idea is that that's someone who reverses letters. So
Hmm.
I just did you know, what I could do, which was get online and start researching. Um, Discovered that there was an approach, and that's where my advocacy started.
Yeah. Yeah. So we went to Dr. Google, which is like a parent's best friend. And you found this approach. And I'm assuming that you were like, excited and you took it to the school.
I did. By then I had an IEP, and I, for those who don't know, IEP is an individual education plan, and that is something where it's a legal document highlighting what the needs of what the child is for their educational, career and the accommodations that they can provide. Um, and I came across that an Orthan Gillingham Bates, reading based approach is really optimal for students who have dyslexia. So I was like, there was tons. I got tutoring lists, but I at the time I was a young mom and I was starting my career, and I didn't have the resources kind of available to me always. Um, so I went to his school and let them know, listen, like this is what's going on here. I got the thing solved. Um, so let's get that reading program up and queued up for him so he can be on his way. And that's when I was told that no public school in New York City has an Orthan Gillingham based reading approach, and no teacher is trained in that approach because both of them are massively expensive. But I was told, just do what we're recommending and it will get better.
Did he?
No, not at all. It actually got worse. significantly
Yeah.
worse. That is where his mental health started to really affect him, because as he got older, um, he it was glaring that there was an issue. He was made fun of when he was asked to read out loud. He then started having severe panic attacks about going to school. He was, at some point, like in the third grade, he was bedwetting, um, just of sheer anxiety. I had him in therapy. It was a lot, and I think I know it compounded the feelings. There was one particular year that he had a teacher who was god awful to him. Like, there's
Mm.
no other way to say it. They were really god awful to him. And, thankfully there was a co-teacher in the classroom, so she really became supportive. But that experience actually really scarred him moving forward, of how he viewed his teachers, how he viewed school. So it was definitely not a positive experience for him, unfortunately.
Ah, that is so heartbreaking. The school should be a place where you kids are supported
Yeah.
and understood, and they are thriving. And it's so hard to hear that he had such a hard experience.
Eventually, what ended up happening is we, middle school and high school really, like, it kind of bottomed out by then. Um, he actually ended up going to what we call here in New York City a District 79 high school, where these are more transitional high schools for students who just either want to get their GED or are doing a combo of like school and career path type of things, or, educational training certificates. That way, so they can just be done with it and move on. So he ended up just getting his GED during the pandemic. And unfortunately, he has no interest really in higher education at this point of his life. His argument is like, why would I want to subject myself to a higher education system, um, where my experience leading up to that point wasn't um, exceptional
Yeah,
or fruitful. So,
yeah. I mean, so you had the experience of really seeing how starting in first grade, not like having this intervention, the ripple
mm-hmm.
effects of that. But then you have three
Mm-hmm.
more kids. So tell me about your experience with your little ones, which has been totally different.
So absolutely, by the time I had Jonah, I had learned a lot. So by the time when Elijah came around, who's my second kid, I really quickly realized by kindergarten that there was an issue. Same for my twins. By kindergarten, I knew that there was an issue. What I discovered is that how I got the supports for them really depended on the teacher and the school. In one of the cases, I had teachers that were all in, who were like, there's an issue here. Yes, I support you. But by the time it came to getting my child evaluated, the staff really wasn't supportive. At one point I was told that I needed to calm down, which,
Mm-hmm.
you tell anyone to calm down, and you do the complete polar opposite. I think the most disheartening piece for me was when I was told that it was perfectly fine if my child didn't learn how to read past the third grade, that he will just eventually learn, which in New York State, third grade is a testing year for state exams. And I'm raising children of color. So these are two things that I know are absolute, but when you are given that sort of information as like, don't stress out about it, I think really fueled I'll be honest, my anger on
Yeah,
how we support students like them. So
yeah,
when my twins got into kindergarten, same deal. I knew what was going on. So by now, I knew I had 4 children who were dyslexic. I had all started the process and got confirmations that all 4 are dyslexic. And what people don't understand or know is that if you have one child that has dyslexia, you have an over 75% chance of your second child being dyslexic, because there is a genetic component to this. This is neurological, and it's not something that goes away. It's not something that, like, give them reading skills and they just do well. You
Yeah.
learn skills to cope and manage. It's like a health condition, right? You have high
Yeah.
blood pressure, you have a lifestyle change, you have medicines, you learn to cope. You don't,
Yeah.
if you do it well, it does go away. But for something that's neurological and conditioned, it's just learning how to use the skills that you have been taught with literacy to do better.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so interesting to hear you describe it as a medical condition, which is what it is. And your example about high blood pressure is a really good one, because my understanding is that these tools and skills that support kids with dyslexia support all kids in the same way that,
Yeah.
like, eating healthy is good for everybody, whether you have high blood pressure or not. And
Hmm.
so tell me a little bit about what you've learned about these methods of teaching kids to read that are designed for kids with dyslexia, but how do they apply to others?
What I, again, because the way I learned this process is literally by just like diving in and reading materials and reading articles and reading the research. Um, and all these Orthan Gillingham based approaches use something called, is based out of a body of work called the science of reading. And this is a body of work that has been developed over several decades. And it's really rooted in science. So they have been MRI brain scans, there has been studies done, and they've been able to really look at the brain and see where are the regions in the brain that need to be activated, what parts of the brain do what for language. And based off of that, they have sort of outlined what are the best practices. And what science of reading does is really just center not just phonics, because I think this is my biggest pet peeve, is like, oh, this is about phonics.
Hmm.
It's about phonics and it's
Right.
about phonics and decoding. It's about phonics and verbal reasoning. And unfortunately, an approach that we've had in this country for a long time, and honestly globally, is this approach called balanced literacy, where they did comprehension really well, like, reading comprehension and background knowledge really well. But the phonics piece, the decoding piece, was something that wasn't done as part of the curriculum holistically. So what these curriculums that are based in these approaches, it teaches children like the rules of the language.
Right.
They don't understand that the English language is really hard. I'm not
Yeah.
a native English speaker, and like the fact that PH makes an F sound is crazy to me.
Right. 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 And then the
you know,
vowels make two different kinds of
yeah.
sounds. It's all, yes.
And all the rules like that, like, I before E except after C, like, or sounded this way, like it's always something.
And
So
every rule has an exception.
everyone,
Constantly.
right,
So,
right.
yeah.
So it's teaching children those rules. So when they are presented with a word that, besides the basic skills that they've been taught about, sounding it out, if they encounter the word that is a PH word, they go, oh, I know that's an F sound.
Right.
So that's what it's based on.
Yeah. And it's been proven to help all kids improve
Yeah.
reading.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
And
It's
so,
it's
yeah.
95% of all readers can read this way.
Yeah. Um, and unfortunately, when your little ones were when you discovered that they were also dyslexic, were there any public schools in New York using these programs yet?
No, no,
Yeah.
not one.
So what did you do?
I did what I could do, which was really, get them the supports that they needed in the classroom. The dynamic that has happened in my house is that my oldest and my youngest of one of the twins, they are the most severely dyslexic, where my second son and my son's twin daughter, my twin daughter, one of the twins,
Hmm.
they're actually on the milder side of things. So, but my second kid, I knew that there was these other offerings, these options that I can look into. So I knew there was a private school that actually had a free reading intervention program, and you go twice a week for an hour. Um, so I took advantage of that for all three, and it
Okay.
because my second kid and my daughter were on the milder end, like they flew. They just needed that really targeted support to learn how to like dissect those words, and like my daughter will devour any book you give her. Like she
Yeah.
loves it.
Yeah.
Now it didn't translate as transforming for my youngest son.
Yeah.
So I knew he needed more, and that's where my crossroads with public school started, because it acknowledging that I think was really hard for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Can you say a little bit more about that? Did you go to public school growing up?
I actually did not go to public school.
Okay.
I went to parochial school growing up in the city in the 80s. But by the time my children were enrolled, I knew from the very onset that I you know, when I was going, it was affordable to go to parochial school. By the time my kids started going, I didn't see a need to leave the public school system. And I
Oh,
started getting involved by then. I started, being on the PTA or the PA. I started, being on the school governance um, teams of the school. And then I actually got involved locally. So I sat on my local school board. In New York City, we call them slightly different, but I was on my local school board. I literally wrapped up my final eighth year term this past June, and I was president for 5 of those
amazing.
years. So
Oh,
like
wow.
I was all in. Like I will continue to die on a sword for public school education, because I fundamentally believe that every child has a right to a good education, to go to their local school and do well. So when I saw how bad my son was struggling, honestly, it kind of hit me during the pandemic, when I had literally like a front row view of what it was like for him to sit in the classroom. I had a moment realizing I needed to. It was all kind of like my life was in front of me, because I had my son in the living room preparing for his GED, and I had my son sitting next to me not being able to write or decode a single word on the screen, and he
Yeah.
was in fourth grade by then,
Yeah.
the beginning of the year, no, third grade. So I knew, like, if I didn't intervene and do something, I was going to have a repeat of what was happening in the living room. I needed to
Yeah.
save him.
Ooh, that must have been a really difficult moment. What did you feel right then?
It felt like a breakup. Honestly, it did. Like I felt hurt. I felt really pained that I needed to leave the community, that I needed to leave his school district. Like it really bothered me that I had to do this, because
Yeah.
I shouldn't like have to now. And the only option that exists at the time was I needed to then hire an attorney. I needed to get an expensive or redo an expensive evaluation, which start between $5,000 and $10,000.
Ooh.
And then I needed to advocate to the school district that he needed a different school setting. And if they did not agree with me, I then needed to file a lawsuit to then get him placed into a private school. All while I am now looking at private schools and applying and submitting application fees. So this was a major money commitment piece that I knew was coming. And I knew that the tuitions in these schools were not cheap. I mean, the
Right.
school he ends up going to is $80,000 a year.
Wow.
So I knew that I was leaving kind of the cushy environment that I really am adherent. Like I will, like I said, I will dinosaur for public school education. But then I realized that it wasn't working for my son, and if I
Yeah.
left him, I was going to lose him. And I needed to
Yeah.
save
That
him.
is such a difficult decision that so many parents are faced with. This sort of like,
Yeah,
I need to do right by my kid, even if I feel very strongly about a system that I believe in, and what I believe should be right and available to all kids. And you're not, I
yeah,
mean, this is a story that I've heard over and over and over again from so many parents. And ultimately, we have to do what we have to do to
hmm,
keep our kids safe and to make sure that they thrive. So I hear that, and I know how difficult that decision is for so many parents.
hmm,
So,
yeah.
um, tell me about the process of the lawyer, the private school, all of it.
Oh,
Yeah.
geez. So I spent at least 6 months looking at schools. At the time, it was, in the height of the pandemic, so there was lots of virtual tours, which was fine. Um, that helped me kind of decide which was part of my list. Um, but then I was at the same time waiting for a neuropsychological evaluation that is part of the application. So
Right.
once we completed that, I had three offers in total, but one of them is the one that I knew he needed to go to. And that actually, the school was like, when, they were happy to take him there, but I could right then and there, but I couldn't do that because there's a process that you need to go into before you do that. You need to be able to notify the school district, have them do a new IEP. Like, it's all
Yeah.
very long, and that in itself took another 6 months. So by the time we were done, it was already June,
Yeah.
and the whole school year had gone by. Um, but what we ended up doing is, the minute the school district refused to place him, acknowledge that he needed an alternative setting, my attorney then filed a lawsuit that, by the way, needs to be done every single year until he
Wow.
graduates. It's not something that happens automatic.
Right.
So I love my attorney, and I'm glad for that, because otherwise, I'm with her for the next, until he graduates in 12th grade.
Yeah.
So she has to file a lawsuit every single year, letting them know that we are intending to place him into a non-public school.
Yeah.
And then the legal system picks up from there, and that is very slow, very tedious. So, for an example, the lawsuit that I filed the first time 2 years ago, I literally just got a judgment decision from the law judge acknowledging that he needed a private school setting in January of this year.
Wow.
So
Okay.
it's a 2-year delay system.
Okay. But you didn't wait 2 years. You
He's
were
in the
able to get
school,
him to
right?
start the school.
Yeah,
Okay.
he went to school in 5th grade at the school.
Okay.
And what I then was told is that the reason my kid was struggling to decode or to even read in general, I mean, this my son could not read a restaurant menu. I mean, this was really life altering for
Life
him.
skills. Yeah, absolutely.
He couldn't text. Like, I had to get him an Alexa so he could
Yeah.
text his friends, like on Xbox, Alexa, how do you spell
Hmm.
this,
Yeah.
coping. That's all I can help him to do. um it does. They told me he was reading on a first grade reading level.
Yeah.
So
Um,
it was pretty transformative. I think the piece that ended up working really well for him is that he finally was in a school setting where he wasn't being made fun of anymore, because every kid there had something. Some
yeah.
kids had ADHD, some kids struggled to read just like him. So he didn't feel otherized. He didn't feel singled out. and no one was like picking on him, no one was pulling him out for special services because everything is baked into the school model. Um, and he was in a classroom reading group with other kids who are just at his level too. So he didn't feel, for once, he actually felt really in a place of support.
And how did that sort of show up in his day-to-day life and in sort of how he interacted with you, and what did that look like in real life?
His demeanor immediately started to change. Like it was interesting. It was like a slow, you know how when you go to the museum and they're talking about the evolution of humans, how like
Hmm.
we're like hunchback, and as you start as the as it's evolved, you start standing up strong, taller,
Yeah.
and that's
Yeah.
exactly the way it was with him. He was like really reluctant the first couple of weeks, and then like slowly but surely, like he started showing up, and like he started feeling a little bit more confident, started standing a little bit more taller, and hearing that his own teachers have
Yeah.
feelings too. Like they had a kind of like a round robin moment in the classroom early on, just like level setting of where everyone was. And he was like, "Mom, even my teachers like aren't perfect. Like they have something too." I was like, "Well," and that's and that I think to him meant a lot because again, he didn't feel different. And over the months and now years, like, is he reading at level? No, because my kid is walking in at least 5 years behind.
Wow.
Um,
Yeah.
but can he decode? Yes. Can he text me now? Absolutely. Can he read subtitles for shows? And he can like
That's
order food from a menu, and like that's literally what the work looks like when you
yeah.
give these skills in the classroom and they translate to real life.
That's fantastic. And the thing that you said about just feeling seen and
Hmm.
that level of representation, that's also that makes such a difference, right?
Yeah.
For a kid that age. Um, but you didn't stop there. Because I mean, when you tell me this story, I think about, okay, so you are clearly um, a powerhouse. You have had this experience with your older son, and you are driven, and you have the resources, and you know how to do your research, and it still took you years to kind of get your kid in a
Hmm.
position where he needed to be. So I think about the parent who just immigrated from a different
Hmm.
country, or the parent who themselves does not have the the knowledge, or isn't able to read as well,
Hmm.
or know how to navigate the system. What do
Hmm.
they do, and what happens to their kids?
Right.
um, and and so I know that you've continued to advocate for this, and I imagine that you've been thinking about those families as well in part of that.
Yeah, that's actually one of the reasons why I continue to do this work, because another thing that I didn't mention is that my kid's father is also severely dyslexic, but he
Hmm.
was undiagnosed. I think there's a generation of there's a lot of adults walking around just being told that they were bad or lazy or didn't care about their education, and kids do what they do really well. They deflect and avoid.
Right.
um, so he and it wasn't until we got to this point with my youngest son where I said, listen, I'm gonna have to pull him out of public school. I'm gonna have to put him in private school. And that was really the first time that he acknowledged, where he was like, well, as long as he doesn't have the experiences I had in public school and he can read, that's what I want.
Yeah.
um, but what ended up happening is, at the same time that I am, a couple of years before I started dealing with the legal process of getting my child into the school that he's in now, New York City had a competition called Imagine Schools. And basically, it was like an all call for new school ideas. And they had funding from a couple of people, a couple of organizations, just to help with the school planning process. And a group of moms had this concept of creating the first public school to support struggling readers. Now, there was a team assembled, and they approached me, and they said, listen, I know you're in this space because of your personal experience. At the time, I was sitting on the school board, and they said, we would love your support. I was like, yeah, go with God. Absolutely. And they were like, well, we would also love for you to be part of this team. And I was like, I don't think so. And not because like I didn't think it was a great idea. I thought it was a wonderful idea. Um, I just had really specific, like I really targeted specific asks. Like, I didn't want the school to be another environment where more people with access can get into the school. Like, if we're going to do a public school, it should be truly a public school where
Right.
everyone can have access to. Now, what that looked like, I don't know. I didn't design schools,
Right.
but, I was thinking to Naomi, 20 plus years ago when I became a first time mom. I didn't know the system. I didn't have the resources. I was just starting out with my career. Like, everything was finite for me, and every dollar mattered. And I knew I didn't want to be part of a team that would do that. And not that I'm saying that they would, but these were all things that they were actually grappling with and discussing. And at the time, it was when they finally approached me, it was during the pandemic, and I was dealing with my own kids at home, remote learning, and I was also really involved in the community about initiatives, making sure that families got food, and so there was a lot going on.
Yeah.
I said, listen, I'm happy to be supportive. You need me to sign a document? Absolutely. But being part of this team, like, I know my how much I can give, and that's not there yet, which they respected. They were like, well, we'll just keep you updated. I was like, yeah, do that.
Right.
And then one of the women on the team, I knew her because she also sat on the adjacent school board, next to my district. So I knew she had taken her son to a private school. So I had reached out to her when I was considering this for my own son. So she, God sent, was like sitting with me, explaining how the process worked, put me in contact with people who put me in contact with attorney. Like, it was just like a nice, supportive system. But even with the support of this woman and putting me in contact with other people, it was really so time consuming. And by the time I was done, I had hours and hours and hours invested in this process, thousands of dollars, thousands thrown at it, hours and hours of like conversations with people that led me to other things. And it was like a lot of networking. So when I was done, she then kind of like looked at me and was like, well, and I was just like venting about how horrible this process was. And she was like, well, you can change it. And I was like, okay, I see where we're going here. And I was like, all right, let me
Tricked me.
dip my toes into this space. I have I now feel relieved of where my son is going to go, so I can now transition into this project. So, I thought I was just going to be there to support ideas. I was also really heavily connected with people that that they needed to meet. So I was able to facilitate a lot of meetings. And as each meeting went by, each week went by, each conversation happened, I was like, okay, like, we need to do this. We need to open this school up. It took 4 years and two
Wow.
different administrations. But we were able to successfully open the first New York City public school that is specifically supporting students who struggle with their reading. So we opened South Bronx Literacy Academy this September to 67 kids and their families. All of our kids are 2 to 3 years behind. It is a mixed bag of who's showing up. Like we have some IEP kids, the vast majority are not. There are just general ed students who struggled with reading. We trained for 6, 8. We trained about 14 teachers. But by then we had developed a training model for 2 years in advance, years ago. So
Mm-hmm.
last year we trained like 20 teachers. And the outcomes have been pretty remarkable, and we're only in December. So kind of the testimonials coming out of families are like, thank God I found this school, and my kid is not school refusing. My kid is starting to decode. They can read. They're not angry. I have one mom who said that the therapist is asking what we're doing at the school because it's a different boy. He's a different boy. He's not. He was so angry that he couldn't read. He was so angry. But
Yeah.
he's doing amazing. So the vision. So we actually formed a nonprofit because we were like, all right, like we can't stop at one school.
Right.
Um, So I say the vision of the organization as Literacy Academy Collective, we want to open up a school in every borough in New York City. But honestly, like I've always said, I'm thinking big. We're going for world domination. So every time I've done these interviews, I like one time I did an interview and I got a teacher who like DM'd me from Ireland and was
Yeah.
like, we don't teach kids how to read either.
Yeah.
So this is a global issue.
It's a global issue. Um, I got chills hearing the stories of how well it's going for the families at this new school. Um, and it just makes me think about, as a mom, this mom guilt that we all feel when we see that our kids are not thriving and they're not doing well, and we just feel like it's our fault. And our kids, it sounds like, are feeling like it's their fault, like they're stupid, like they can't. And just to wrap up, what would you say to somebody who's feeling like that right now? Like this is on them.
Right. I will say that those feelings are absolutely real. I mean, I still carry guilt about not being able to help my first son. And we've had, a conversation around that because he actually was like, why couldn't you bring me to a school like you did for Lucas? And kind of having that conversation of like, I didn't know. Like, I didn't know this was an option that I had. And I don't know if I would have been able to do it. Like, all these phone calls, all this money. Like it was not something that, it still pains me. I wish I know his trajectory would be different if he had that as an option. But the one thing that I can't fault myself for that because you're not
It's
born
not
with
your
this.
fault.
You're right. A kid, when your kid is born, they don't go, here's the handbook. I mean, ideally, that would be amazing.
Yeah.
But as a mom that's raising 4 kids, every single one of them is so vastly different from the other. Like you can't have, and I've learned this as well, like raising young adults and teenagers. Like you have to set the expectation, but there's a level of understanding that you need to have that they will set their own path. That's hard
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
as parents we want to dictate that, but you can't.
Yeah.
Um, but my one advice is you need to, once you know there's something wrong, don't ever 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 let people tell you no, because what I found was many people were trying to tell me to calm down or don't worry about it, but then at the end of the day when your kid is not doing well, they will still blame you because that's what they were doing to me. You're not reading enough. Are you reading enough to your kid? Do you have enough books? Or the coded language of, is there anything going on at home?
Yeah.
And ultimately it wasn't any of that. It was, he needed something different. So I would say never give no for an answer and be persistent, even if it means
Yeah.
agitating. because that's the only way you get it done.
Okay, Naomi, tell us about the name of your organization. How do we find out more about it? Where do we get to see what this looks like in real life?
Yeah. So organization is called Literacy Academy Collective. Website is literacyacademycollective.org. All our socials is a literacy acad, ACAD, NYC. So we're on Twitter or X, whatever you call it now, Instagram, Facebook. And if you have any questions, you can always email us at info@literacyacademycollective.org.
Thank you so much. I know that a lot of parents are going to find this information so useful, and you might get some outreach from this. So be prepared.
Yeah. No, well, thank you so much. I'm grateful to share my story, and I know it's the story of so many other families. Like, we're not alone in this process. And it's not just students who have dyslexia; it's a lot of other students as well. So I'm happy to share my story with you. Thank you so much, Eileen, for having me.
Thank you, Naomi.